Hi, everyone. I want to introduce you to someone who's new to the Don Lemon channel. Jacob Ward, a longtime journalist, NBC News, PBS, Al Jazeera, and much more. He is the founder of The Rip Current, a weekly look at technology and politics. He has covered racism and bias in the United States for years now and has a really interesting personal perspective on all of this DEI nonsense that I wanted to share his perspective with you. It's in his DNA because Jake's dad went from a childhood in India to the civil rights movement to being a historian of slavery. So it is a family thing for him. And I know you will enjoy his take and his content. Welcome to the Don Lemon channel, Jacob Ward.
The idea that we are somehow debating DEI is stupid. And it's not a debate. And anyone, you shouldn't let anyone drag you into debating it. But if you do, I want to share with you, if you get trapped in that conversation, I want to share with you an argument that I was taught many, many years ago that I think cuts right through it. Before I do that, though, I want to talk a little bit about how I, as a straight white dude, have come to a place of peace with the notion that there is important work to be done in this country to compensate for years and years and years of discrimination, beginning with slavery and continuing into the present day. And I just think it is so weird to me to watch people who come from the same kind of privilege that I do, claiming to have no moral or ethical responsibility to account for that terrible past, or in any way to help people who have been historically marginalized to get to the same place that people like me have. All of that has made me nuts. So here is how I got there. And it has to do in part with my dad. So my dad grew up in part in India. His dad worked for an American foundation over there and brought his family. And so my dad spent a big chunk of his childhood over there. And he said that the experience of doing that was a totally life-changing thing, in part because he said he just very quickly realized that the coolest possible people, the people who were actually important to the culture and the politics and the future of that nation, were not white people. It was Indians. It was people who lived in that country. And for him, he felt, he just sensed like it, everywhere he went and everything he did, the cool people were Indian. And the white people were just kind of irrelevant, just visitors, tourists, really. And to have that for him be this formative part of his childhood was such a big deal, because then when he came back to the United States, this was the early 60s, he suddenly is in this position where he's watching the civil rights movement unfold. And to him, he said he just couldn't believe that there was a systemic effort to discriminate against non-white people. That just to him was outrageous, coming from the childhood that he had had. He was like an extraterrestrial, who had landed on Earth and just said, what is this? What's going on here? He spent a big chunk of his teens and his 20s as a result photographing civil rights demonstrations, and he went on to be a historian of slavery and colonialism. So, as you can imagine, growing up with a dad like that, he imparts to you, as a young white person, a very, specific kind of understanding that it is my responsibility, everybody with my background, our responsibility to help compensate, help account for, see clearly the horrible, horrible stuff that has happened in the past, and then, get to a place of peace about it such that you can see it clearly and push back against it. And for him, he says that the whole thing here is this notion that you really just have to feel the emotions of it, because it feels emotionally difficult. It's complicated to feel how much my own family and families like mine had to do with keeping this terrible oppressive system, slavery, going. And at the same time, you have to be able to say, okay, even though I'm not personally connected to that, and in my life I've tried to conduct myself in a better way than that, that doesn't mean that I'm not, that it's not up to me to participate in the sort of the making up for this. He taught me to be conscious of my family's place in the history of oppression and discrimination, but he also made it clear that, while reckoning with the past can be emotionally painful, My pain is not what's important here. Speaking honestly about that past, that history, is the very least we can do because it's the first step in fighting for something better. And I just grew up assuming that coming to grips with all of that is what all adults had to do. And so to me, to be in a place right now, to watch people in power criticizing diversity as some sort of, weakness is crazy to me and deeply triggering for two reasons. One, the idea that it has political expedience, that there are people out there who will applaud when you say that kind of thing, that's really tough to take. That bothers me a huge amount. But the second part of it is that the idea that you would critique what I consider to be like the fundamentally cool thing about the United States. I mean, the thing that I always, whenever I travel elsewhere in the world, as I've been so lucky to do in my job, when I come back to the United States, what's so cool about this place is the theoretical idea that if you give equal opportunity to the widest variety of people, huge innovations come out of that. Culture and art and music and food and technology and science, that is what makes us great. That's what makes America great. So to see people sort of critiquing that as if somehow there's something better to be done by not accounting for the past is so crazy to me. Anyway, given everything I've just told you, here is the argument that my dad taught me to make. I'm going to read it to you here. It's to me, it is extremely modern, but you're going to be surprised in a second when I tell you when this came out. So the white team and the black team are playing the last football game of the season. The white team owns the stadium, owns the referees, and has been allowed to field 9 times as many players. For almost 4 quarters, the white team has cheated on every play. And as a consequence, the score is white team 140, black team 3. Only 10 seconds remain in the game, but as the white quarterback huddles with his team before the final play, a light suddenly shines from his eyes. So how about it, boys? He asks his men. What do you say from here on we play fair? This is the fundamental idea. Just because you declare a rigged game to be fair does not make it fair and is in fact another form of cheating. That's how I think about it. And when people come back at my dad, as they did when he wrote this, with the idea of, well, I wasn't alive for this, and so I don't bear any responsibility for this, he points out that in order for this nation to get to the place where it's been around longer without slavery than it was with slavery, that's not coming until 2111. We are still in the recovery phase of slavery, which, as my dad has written about in all of his books, is, the economic engine that made the United States possible. The billions of dollars in labor stolen from enslaved people is how it is that we got going, essentially. So this argument that I was just describing to you, so it's from a New York Times op-ed published on February 7th, 1989. It's more than 30 years old. And the reason he wrote it at the time was because the Rehnquist Supreme Court was, at that time, had just thrown out a case, basically had tossed aside what were called set-asides for minority-owned city contractors. It was basically an affirmative action system. This is back when affirmative action was still a thing, was still the law of the land and was considered a good thing. And he was pushing back against that because that seemed really nightmarish to him. He could sort of see where things were going. Today, we look back on the Rehnquist Supreme Court and we would have thought it was, a progressive bastion considering where we've come to now. And little did we know that was the beginning of this slippery slope that was going to lead to this moment now where we no longer have affirmative action, where quotas are considered, not only, politically untouchable, but illegal in some cases. So the change has been sort of incredible. And part of what makes me so nuts about this is that this moment that we are in, where people are shouting down not just affirmative action, but just even the idea that we should prioritize diversity, is so crazy to me because there are places around the world that have made tremendous differences in the lives of their citizens by incorporating affirmative action and quotas. One of them is Rwanda. Rwanda reserves 30% of its parliamentary seats for female candidates. I once interviewed an expert who was studying this, and even at the time that we were speaking many years ago, he was nervous to speak to me about it because he knew how politically unpopular this idea was in the United States, and he was so used to conservatives coming after him for it. But what he pointed out to me is, he said, what's been so valuable in Rwanda about this is even though the first crop of people that came in, the first crop of women, were not, qualified in the way one would have theoretically wanted, because they hadn't been educated in the way you would, they deserved to be. They'd been subject to all kinds of unequal treatment for so many, many years. The first crop, the first sort of round of candidates that came in didn't know what they were doing. They were really, they were learning on the job. But he said by the second and third crop of candidates, the qualifications just suddenly cranked up because people around, women around that nation looked at those candidates and said, oh, I can do that. In fact, I can do a better job than that. And began to sort of, it created a culture of improvement. That since 1997, when this went into effect, that country has seen not just greater political gender representation, but a general improvement in the autonomy and, economic success of female Rwandans as a whole. The other example of this is India. So India, where my dad learned to see his place so clearly, it was subjugated in part by the British, by the British, but in part by them exploiting what was a caste system, a system that stratified people by their sort of theoretical place on in Hinduism on their coming back around on the wheel of reincarnation, and where you landed in the social strata had to do with how you'd been in the past life. It's a religious idea that the British used to really crush and stratify this enormous society. So after independence in 1947, India instituted this broad swath of policies that were intended to make up for that. And today, roughly half of elected positions and places in universities are reserved for people from lower castes. And that has done a huge amount of good, a huge amount of good. For every person who gets into one of those positions, their earning ability, the earning ability of their family, all of these things come up. The whole of society has been lifted up by this idea. Now, it's politically controversial. People fight about it all the time in India. It is not a settled thing. But the economic impact has been enormous. And to me, I just think that stuff is just inarguable. If we're really about, if we're really only going to look at this in economic terms, and I don't think we should. I think we should be thinking in historic terms, in moral terms, in ethical terms. But if we're really only going to think about it in that way, then the evidence is clear that prizing diversity, and even going so far as enshrining it in law, makes a huge difference. And the last thing I'll just say here is, for me as a person, it is, and as a white male, a straight white male, I recognize that there are going to be times in which, I may get passed over in order to have a more diverse set of candidates considered. And I just think that's how the world has to be. If I didn't have the background I did, I'd be subject to all kinds of discrimination, especially in the past. And it really is going to be up to people like me. And I understand that I am deeply privileged in being able to say this and being able to weather, economic downturn and, all of that stuff. I get it. But I really think, in the same way that my dad taught me to, believe in our responsibility, our abstract responsibility to help compensate for bad behavior in the past, I just think it's part of being from the future to reckon with this and to see my own place in it as clearly as I possibly can.
Thanks everyone for watching. Your support means the world to us. So make sure you hit the like button and you subscribe to our channel to make sure that you never ever miss a video. We're live every day, 10 a.m. Eastern time. We drop even more content at 2 p.m. Eastern and 5 p.m. Eastern. And if you want more Don Lemon Show content, we'd love for you to become a member of the Lemon community, where you will receive access to special community posts. You'll get exclusive content and members-only live shows. So head over to our channel page or click the join button on this video. Again, thank you for watching. We appreciate your love and your support, and we will see you next time.